I think we're live. And would you like to welcome everybody to Libertarian Currents?
Of course. Everyone, welcome to our new podcast, Libertarian Currents, where I will be offering some views and thoughts on current events. And of course, it will be done from a libertarian viewpoint. So, welcome.
And I'm David, and we have some topics lined up. We're going to discuss a recent robbery at the LCBO. Jacques would like to discuss Jagmeet Singh's apparent the way he despises CEOs in our country. Talk about recriminalization of hard drugs in British Columbia, and some discussion about the federal budget. Now, behind the scenes, we have our producer who will put a link on the screen, a QR code that if you'd like to join and make comments, you're welcome to do that. You can make comments and Jacques can see those or react to those in real time. And I guess let's start with the first video. Hey, Jacques?
Yes.
Okay, producer, please start the video.
Round one, fight! Vergleichen! Shoryuken! You win!
So obviously this is a video of a robbery taking place in an LCBO here in Ontario, and someone has superimposed video game the Street Fighter sound effects to it. And Jacques, we've had some discussion already this week, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about that video and everything it relates to.
Well, the video, to my mind, is a reflection of what's going on in North America. If we consider what's happened in California, for example, where at some point thefts below $500, were not a criminal offense. There's been a real and very difficult understanding to understand what is driving policymakers to believe that somehow property rights should be ignored or not enforced. Technically, the LCBO is it's a crown corporation in Ontario, so we're not really talking private property rights. But I think again, it's a reflection of what's going on in North America, where many politicians seem to think that if you are poor, you are sort of a victim, and we ought to allow you to fight back by stealing from other people. It's misguided on many grounds. One of which, of course, is that these are not victimless, right? To the extent that companies find it very difficult to make money, they will leave, as they've done in Chicago, for example, recently, where the theft was so commonplace that they were losing money and they pull out, right? And then people are upset because they no longer have their favorite store in town. An alternative, of course, is that prices will be increased for everybody because, again, these people they do have to make a profit in order to continue to function. So, the fact that the employees, I suspect, were ordered not to intervene when something like this happens. I mean, I'm not talking about someone sort of taking a bullet for the LCBO, but at least challenging people and, calling the cops, which didn't seem to happen either. So all of this is very, very disturbing because it has a number of negative consequences without, just common decency. You don't steal from other people, and that seemed to be almost encouraged by many of the politicians in office in North America right now.
Can I ask you though? You said it's a crown corporation, and I'm a taxpayer. I would is it too far to say that the LCBO is taxpayers' property?
From a legal perspective, I don't know if we're sort of well, it could be.
So
But
I'm
certainly
grasping at straws there.
in terms of the spirit, I understand what you're saying, right? I mean, it is our money as taxpayers, and it ought to be protected. Yes, it's just that technically,
It is the provincial government who requires that particular kind of product be regulated and managed by the government. It
by the way,
Yeah.
I should add that the history of the LCBO is an interesting one, because I can think of at least two provincial governments in the past have asked for, I don't know if they were studies or, yeah, I think they were studies and asking for recommendations to what to do with it. And in both instances, the recommendation was to sell them, and the governments refused on the ground that, and I could be off here because I'm going from memory, but I think they pay something like a $1.8 billion dividend to the government every year, and they didn't want to lose that. Well,
Mhm.
again, when I was referring to cost, if the LCBO makes less money because booze is stolen on a regular basis, the dividend, I'm assuming, is going to be reduced, and ergo hurt taxpayers.
I was recently in Toronto, and there's an LCBO there on Yonge Street that had a security guard. I have not seen that often. I don't know where this video was captured, by the way. Do you? But it didn't look like there was a security guard in the video. I think you're right that the staff have been instructed to just avoid the problem, defer it to the police. Um, what would you say to people who might feel uncomfortable that this particular citizen has taken it into his own hands to try and stop these people from leaving the LCBO? Vigilante justice and all that.
Yeah, well, um, I mean, it would certainly be preferable if it was done by the police, arresting the person. I can see people losing their cool though, seeing that, and again, maybe this person recognized that he was, it could be affected by higher prices if theft was allowed to go on, right? And I can, again, I have sympathy for the outrage he felt at people brazenly stealing like this.
I've
And
seen a lot of some comments online, and I think there's a deeper sense of trouble here. That these comments are saying that this man wasn't defending the booze. Like he's not trying to stop them from stealing the booze. He's trying to defend um, his country,
decent,
they would say, or yeah, he's trying to defend like a
decent
principle.
behavior. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that if we believe we live in a society based, or if we believe that we have a high trust society, then this is not the kind of behavior that can be tolerated. And I appreciate some of those comments. Andrew Scanlon here made a comment at Facebook. I think you're seeing it on your screen, Jacques. He says the degeneracy of society. I even had an LPO at a PC store tell me that they couldn't stop the shoplifter that I brought to their attention because, quote, we don't have the time or the evidence. This seems to be a change since I was younger. It seems when I was younger, security guards had some duty to stop shoplifters. Staff may have also had duty to stop shoplifters, but that has apparently changed.
yeah. And I would stress, I think, again, the way to win people is to educate them on the fact that this is not costless to them. This has a cost. It will cost you more because the retailer will have to recoup, his cost somewhere. So, or they may pull up and go somewhere else. So again, there's so many of these sort of this attitude or legislations or whatever that are passed that are always based on the fact that there's no cost to doing nothing, and it's not true at all. So we have to remind people there is a cost to this. you see someone, yet turn them in because, and in fact, there are retailers who put up these signs saying, we are going to prosecute, people to the full extent of the law because we are trying to keep our prices down. And if you steal from us, it's more difficult to do that. In fact, I think later on we're going to talk about politicians who accuse stores of gouging people, what have you. I mean, you cannot at the same time demand that CEOs tries to keep their price down and at the same time allow people to steal without being punished. Right? It
That
makes
is a
no
great
sense.
That's a great point. And actually, we were I have ready a little video here of Jagmeet Singh saying exactly that. Blaming CEOs of taking high salaries and enjoying excess profits. In light of everything, let's have a look.
We've been raising lots of concerns about the fact that we're seeing in society this ongoing trend that any crisis happens, it is workers that are asked to sacrifice. And right now, when we're experiencing unprecedented inflation, we're seeing people that are feeling squeezed, they can't afford their groceries, they can't afford their bills. At the very same time, the CEOs of the companies they work for are making more salary, making more compensation than they've ever made before. So inspired by a law that was proposed by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, what we're proposing today is to put in place a tax on the excess salaries of CEOs. And what this bill will propose to do is to finally say clearly that if you can afford to pay CEOs exorbitant salaries, then you should increase the wages of workers. This is to decrease inequality. This is to force companies to stop the inequality that continues to grow. 25 years ago, the gap between what the median income of a worker at a company and the CEO was about 100 times difference in salary. Today, the average is 243, over 240 times. Massive increase over 25 years. And then we've got some egregious examples. One example, I'm sure you're not surprised I'm going to give you, is Galen Weston, who earns 431 times more than the median income of someone at his company. 431 times higher pay. That is excessive. People look at that and get frustrated and say, why is it that he gets 431 times more pay than the median income earner of someone who is at that company? That is outrageous. And so what we're proposing is an incentive. If corporations ensure that there's less gap between the median income of a worker between workers and the CEOs, if there's less gap, they will not have to contribute higher tax. But if there's a massive gap, they can afford to pay a huge salary for their CEO, then they can afford to contribute more so that Canadians can have more support and more resources. And that's what we're proposing today.
This guy, my goodness. Where to begin? Well, first of all, let's call a spade here. He and all his fellow MPs have had numerous salary increases over the last few years. He's never turned one down. I don't know what the ratio is of the average MP's salary to the average Canadian, but given that they are supposed to work for us, it's funny with this sort of left-wing thing. It's always people who make more than you that are to be vilified, right? Because the thinking seemed to be that anybody who earns up to what I'm earning clearly has done it the way I have, which is honestly. But anyone who out earns me clearly is nefarious in some ways. Now, the first thing I would say to him is this type of control has been tried before and it doesn't work. It's as simple as that. He should go with the empirical evidence. As an aside, I find the NDP in this country to be not only full of nonsense, but for some reason they can never come up with their own nonsense. Right? He was quoting from the U.S. and over the last, ever since Singh's been leader of the party, all I've seen from them is things that they borrow from the US. They can't come up with their own stuff. So, but it's not terribly relevant, but it does make me smile when I see them quote the US. Um, what a CEO, like if he were to cap a CEO's salary and divide the so-called savings among all their employees, it would amount to peanuts, right? Like again, it's based on this premise that he'd be able to increase the salary of all of his employees by very noticeable amount. That's nonsense. That's not true at all. And frankly, what a CEO makes is completely irrelevant to how much an employee ought to earn. An employee earns something that, without getting too technical, has to do with their productivity, marginal productivity. And again, what the CEO makes is irrelevant to that equation. So again, this is all class warfare. He's going after people to, I don't know, somehow cater to maybe their members who enjoy that, but it's poor economics. It's been tried. It doesn't work. It interferes with the market. And maybe a better way is that if people think that a particular CEO makes too much money, they can shop somewhere else, right? In a free market where you've got multiple choices, that would be far better than having the government start to interfere with, again, all this minutia of calculating what is your ratio, and if your ratio is more than X, we're going to do this, and if it's less, we're going to leave you alone. And I mean, what a waste of time. Let the people decide. If somebody doesn't like a company, go somewhere else, right? Vote with your feet. And that's the way it should be, not to have, again, politicians calculate minutia and pass laws that are based on that.
I like that you brought up classism. I think that is the classic NDP strategy to create wedges. It's funny to me that the Conservative Party gets blamed so often for American-style politics, and yet he's, this is Jagmeet Singh borrowing directly from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Now, I have a question.
Here's a funny story about Bernie Sanders, a very quick one. Bernie Sanders used to rail against millionaires, right? But he wrote a book, and that book made him a multimillionaire. I mean, he was a very, very successful, and he changed his speech. Now he no longer talks about millionaires. He moved it to billionaires. And it goes back to my original point, which is up to my level, everything is hunky-dory, but my goodness, anybody who out-earns me, there's got to be something, nefarious about that.
So what about the choice? Like Jagmeet Singh tends to choose Galen Weston as his target. Galen Weston is always the example. And I find this really interesting because, first of all, everybody needs to buy groceries. And so most Canadians on a relatively regular basis have some interaction with Galen Weston or the Weston family empire. But I find it interesting also because I can dislike the ways that Galen Weston has become wealthy, because to me, he looks like an oligarch. He looks very, very cozy with politicians present and past. And I would say I'm a supporter of capitalism as long as capital is gained through honest means. And I don't know that everything the Weston family has done has truly been honest. Maybe there's conflicts of interest there. Maybe they spend a lot in terms of lobbying. How much do they appreciate the dairy cartel? How much do they want funding from the federal government for green technology like new refrigerators? So that's another example that always comes up, and I think it deserves criticism. Why do you think Galen Weston is always Jagmeet Singh's target?
I have to speculate, but you just brought up the refrigerator. I think it allows him to not only target CEOs, people that he seems to dislike regardless, but it also allows him to take a crack at the liberals, because the liberals are the ones that gave the Loblaws, what was it, $12 million for new refrigerators, right? So he can attack him and also attack the liberals at the same time for having supported the company that, well, pays the CEO too much, makes too much money, the usual stuff.
And he can, by the same token or a similar token, draw in the Conservative Party, who it was under Harper's government that the Loblaws enterprise was allowed to purchase Shoppers Drug Mart. So one monopoly buying another monopoly, making an even bigger monopoly. And that purchase took place under Harper's government with almost no scrutiny.
Right. But, as I mean, I agree with what you said earlier in terms of, corporate welfare and these types. I mean, of course, under a libertarian government, there would be none of that. And we would truly have a free market. And in a true free market, if you want to buy something, I mean, the Competition Bureau would disappear under our government, because, again, these are all subjective rules that people apply. It's interesting that one of the things that they do is governed by the fact that if you have the threshold seems to be a 25% market share or greater, right? They think it's too big. Well, just recently, I was reading that between taxation in this country, of course, the government spending, the taxation that goes with it, the cost of regulation, the cost of red tape, and so forth, governments take about 64% of GDP, right? So 64% of the market share. And yet, Jagmeet Singh would not be opposed to that at all, right? So he's picking and choosing again what turns him off.
I'm just looking up some information here. A long time ago, a relative of mine got her very first job at our local superstore, and it was a unionized position. And so Jagmeet Singh, it's interesting. He has this criticism of Galen Weston and the Loblaws enterprise, but Loblaws is, and the Weston family is one of the largest employers in the country of union members. They employ more union members. Please correct me in the comments if someone's listening and knows this information, because I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. But there are very few unions larger than the one in contract with Loblaws, and does that fuel some of Jagmeet Singh's political positioning here on this point?
Well, it could very well be. I mean, to the extent that he's trying to, again, whip up the unions into bargaining harder, or I mean, as an aside, I mean, this reminds me that one of the sad things that is happening now with all this whipping people into a frenzy is that there's a group now that has started what they think is going to be the first annual Let's Steal from Loblaws, and it's targeted for Sunday, May the 12th. I mean, that a politician, and it would seem to me that the right thing would be to go to him to sing that is, and to say, please tell people not to do that. I doubt very much that he will do, because I think again, he thinks that somehow the people at Loblaws are so evil, right, that stealing from them is actually not a crime. But you can imagine the chaos that would ensue if that were to. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do. Are they going to have armed guards? Are they going to close down? I mean, it's madness to think that no politician, well, except me, has come out to say, don't do this. like you can't just steal because you think that somehow, like if you don't if you don't like Loblaws, go somewhere else. It's as simple as that. But it's again, these talks, these repeated talks. I mean,
Yeah,
they do
yeah.
stir up some people, and they stir them into or steer them in a direction that is unlikely to do any good.
I agree. He's kind of fueling this fire, and he is in a position to de-escalate this movement. I'm really interested to see what happens there, and if people actually organize to take that action on that date or any other date. Um, Jacques, we were talking before our stream about wacko policies and wacko politicians. Do you want to move on to the next video?
Sure, sure.
When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister?
No. I'm going to ask the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to withdraw that term, which is not considered parliamentary.
Mr. Speaker, I replace wacko with extremist.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to please withdraw that comment and simply withdraw that comment.
I'll replace it with radical
No,
leftist policy.
I am not asking to replace. I'm asking the Honourable Member to just simply withdraw.
Mr. Speaker, I replace the word wacko with extremist.
One last time. To please withdraw that comment and simply withdraw that comment.
I simply withdraw and replace with the aforementioned adjective.
The comedy routine.
Stubborn, if nothing else. What do you think?
Well, leaving aside this mini controversy about the term that he used, again, this whole thing about criminalizing drugs, that there's people conflate two things. It's very important to separate them. And let me give an example of alcohol consumption. We live in a society where drinking alcohol is allowed, it's legal, but at the same time, we demand that people do so responsibly, or at least do not drive while under the influence. All right. So, in other words, and this is very much sort of in line with libertarian philosophy. You can do what you want. Like, you want to pass out in your basement, you're so drunk. We have no problem with this, right? You're not hurting anyone. You can go ahead. Now, but we also say, if you're going to get drunk, don't drive, because then you could potentially hurt somebody else. It seems pretty simple to me, pretty commonplace. When it comes to criminalizing drugs or not doing so, well, first of all, criminalizing certain elements simply does not work. Hard drugs have been criminalized for years. Anybody who wants them can get them, right? There are black markets that spring up to basically respond to people's wants and needs. I would remind people that during the Prohibition period in the US, and this was about alcohol, and again, I have to stress that not criminalizing is not a utopia, right? I am not implying that people would behave properly, would use these things responsibly. Of course, I mean, the prohibition in the US was brought on mostly by women who were sick and tired of getting beaten up by their drunk husbands, or husbands who couldn't work anymore and therefore provide for their families, leading to poverty and all that. Well intended, but what we have to recognize is that it did not work. And that's why the prohibition was repealed, because during that period of time, believe it or not, the consumption of alcohol went up, not down, and murder rates went up something like 100-fold, I believe. And it went back down again after it was repealed. So on balance, it was a terrible, terrible thing. So I'm not talking again that if you allow things to be consumed without restrictions, that it's a utopia. but it's a lesser evil than trying to do so. Now, to go back to my comparison with drinking, if you consume drugs and you leave people alone, again, we don't have a problem with that. However, if you do and you start acting in ways that are against the law, or start hurting others, or then of course we should put an end to this. And if we have to incarcerate somebody, then so be it. The problem right now is that we have decided to temporarily allow these drugs to be sold, but not follow up in terms of some of the behavior that is associated with it. I think I heard somebody saying that if you defecated on the sidewalk, the word to the police was not to do anything. Well, that's nonsense. People are entitled to walk on sidewalks without having to watch where they walk. So again, people conflate these two things, and they should really be separated. You want to consume a drug in your basement, not hurting people, fine. But if you do, and then you break laws, or you start bothering people, or even hurting them, then of course the full every legal avenue should be brought upon these people. And so recriminalizing these drugs, I don't think is going to do anything. Again, based on past experience, I don't think it's going to. It's likely to do things, make things worse, not better.
So the argument made, and the pitch that was given to taxpayers in the action, in changing the policies that would decriminalize these narcotics and opiates, was that it would reduce smuggling, reduce addiction, and reduce drug-related crime. And I think the evidence over the past year and more shows that it hasn't achieved those goals. Smuggling continues, the black market continues, addictions continue, and drug-related crimes haven't subsided. But I think what you're saying is that there would be, like, if libertarians were writing policy in this area, we could criminalize the actions that affect others, such as doing this in public places, doing it in hospitals, doing it in public parks, near schools, that sort of thing, but allow for the purchase and consumption.
Yeah.
And I think there's a happy medium there. Like, this is such an interesting case for me because, I think so many libertarians would fall on the side of decriminalization, and yet the experiment that's been run in BC has shown to me that they've done something very wrong in decriminalizing, or the way that they've decriminalized. I think they've decriminalized the the actions in public spaces, and the behaviors that, like you said, on sidewalks and in schools and the waiting rooms of hospitals. And this is not the place for it. This is a place where drug use affects others and infringes on the rights of others.
Yeah. The other thing to make clear to people, as as libertarians, we believe in freedom, but we also believe that with freedom come responsibility, which means that you are responsible for your actions. And I think, again, many politicians have decided that while, they try very hard, of course, to create a nanny state where you cannot misbehave, but they believe that if you misbehave, we ought to come to the rescue every single time. Now, there's something in economics called moral hazard, where, if I misbehave, and by misbehaving here, I'm talking about acting in a way that could be, never mind others, that could be detrimental to your own being, right? And again, as a libertarian, I certainly respect the right of people to misbehave. But in my worldview, if you misbehave, you have to suffer the consequences, right? You are responsible for your action. But when people step in and minimize the consequences to the point where you're almost facing a one-sided bet, right? I mean, if things go well, I'm enjoying myself, and if they go bad, someone comes in and stops me from, paying the full price. I think leads to very poor decision making.
There will be more to say on that, I think, as this issue unfolds. Maybe coming back to the video of Polyev and the Speaker of the House, I have a question for you, whether you felt the Speaker acted in a partisan manner.
Well, I just found out this afternoon that the term wacko had been used 21 times before in Parliament, in the House, without any retribution. So when he said it was unparliamentary language, he was at best misguided.
It's been used before to describe policies or to describe behaviors, but not to describe a person. I think that was the unique piece about this. It was a ad hominem attack, which I don't mind. In fact, I think it fits. If the shoe fits, but even,
Well, I mean, it's not like I don't have some sympathy for that argument. And they often say if you're discussing, or even if you're having an argument with someone, you should refrain from saying to someone, "Well, you're stupid." But it's more acceptable to say, "Well, your argument is stupid," right? The distinction is that the first one is very personal. The second one is more about, you might be a fine person, and I don't think you're stupid, but this particular argument of yours is.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite sure the Speaker was thinking in those terms.
Well,
I
and
think he was
moments
being,
before, seconds before we heard that word from Polyev, Trudeau had called the leader of the opposition spineless, and so I was watching a video, an interview with Thomas Mulcair and Melissa Lantzman on with CTV, I believe. Yeah, it was yesterday evening, and Lisa Raitt and Tom Mulcair both agreed, and they've both been in the House. They've been MPs for much of their lives, and they both agreed that the House misstepped here in a very serious way. Even Tom Mulcair, who has been a staunch defender of this Speaker, he came out and said this was over the line. It was clearly partisan, and suggested, in fact, that he needs to step down. So we'll have to wait and see.
wow, interesting.
Yeah. We have one other topic regarding the budget, the federal budget, this massive budget that has, and I just read a headline this morning that our Minister of Finance has decided to increase the debt ceiling of the country to $2.1 trillion. I think our current debt is 1.3, 1.4 trillion.
That's just federal.
That's just federal. That's right. Yeah. So let's see a clip here from a little bit of debate in the House between Polyev and Freeland.
This wasteful inflationary budget that is like a pyromaniac spraying gas on the inflationary fire that he lit. It is getting too hot and too expensive for Canadians, and that's why we need a carbon tax election to replace him with a common sense conservative government.
Then I have Vice-Premier Ministre et Ministre des Finances.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a point that I think it would be good to get the Leader of the Opposition to offer clarity on.
David, we've lost your audio.
Oh, yes, sorry. I stopped the video just to remark that she's had the microphone for like 15 seconds and has said nothing yet. Let's try to suffer through the next minute or so, but stop me if you want to speak to anything in this video, Jacques.
Yeah.
We presented a clear choice to Canadians. We said to Canadians, we believe that we need the power of government to get things built for young Canadians, to get things built for the people of Alberta who needed the pipeline
David?
that we.
Yeah.
So, of course, as a libertarian, we believe in the power of government is required. It's complete and utter nonsense. There is no empirical evidence to show that this is required. I mean, the free market on its own is quite capable of providing people, as it has shown repeatedly in all kinds of countries. I mean, our neighbors to the south is such a marvelous example of, well, not in its current form, but if you consider where they started and how quickly they became the most powerful country in the world. I mean, it was not government driven, it was free market driven. So, of course, right off the bat, I would say I have such a disagreement with her that it's required. But of course, this is a liberal mindset. And again, it's sad that people in the Liberal Party do not know their own history. I mean, Wilfrid Laurier, who was prime minister for many years, leader of the Liberal for many years, must be spinning in his grave to listen to this, because he was completely opposed to this type of thinking. In fact, he would not be voting Liberal today at all. But these are big government people. It's laughable that 8 years in, they still have to, like, we have to do this now, we have to tweak that. For people who've read Mises, they will know that Mises predicted this. He said governments come in trying to fix a problem. In doing so, they create two more problems, which means that they have to come in and fix the two problems they just created, and in doing so, create more problems. It's never, ever ending. And this government is a perfect example of this. 8 years into its reign, if you wish, by most metric, things are worse than they've been in since they took power. They keep trying to convince people that one more budget and we'll get it fixed. I mean, you have to be naive beyond belief to believe that, right? I mean, this is not going to solve any of the problem. It's in all likelihood, I mean, I'll let it continue because I think she'll talk about possibly capital gains, but if not, I'll come back to that.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that she has just said the quiet part out loud, right? We believe that we need the power of government to fix things.
Yeah.
And, anyone who believes that at this point, you mean the giant deficit spending last year wasn't enough to fix things, and the deficit spending before that wasn't enough to fix things? I mean, how much is enough? Clearly, they don't have enough power yet, is what she's saying here.
That we got built. And we presented a clear, fiscally responsible way to finance those essential.
Fiscally responsible. This is once more nonsense. You alluded to the debt.
Yeah.
Now, Chrystia Freeland, again, is bamboozling people by quoting numbers that, although true, are highly misleading. So she loves to talk about the ratio of debt to GDP. But notice that she only takes the federal debt. The federal debt is about 1.3 billion. Total debt
Trillion,
yes. Total debt, federal and provincial, is now 2.1, actually, I think getting quite close to 2.2 trillion, right? So and the thing is, the reason she gets away with it is that Canada is set up in such a way that we have pretty large subnational governments, right? Quebec, Ontario, and they have large debts. A lot of countries around the world do not, right? Like the UK does not have subnational governments that can run up debt. So she can very conveniently forget about the heavy debt load of the provinces. And of course, we have to remember that the people who are that will have to pay this debt are the taxpayers. Like, we don't have federal government taxpayers and Ontario or Quebec or Alberta taxpayers. We have taxpayers that, now, of course, I'm an Ontarian, so I have to pony up to the Ontario debt, but taxpayers are taxpayers, right? And they have to carry that full load. So you can't, pick and choose. And of course, she is completely silent on the approximately $2.7 trillion of unfunded liabilities. And that, to me, is so, it's to me, as bad as the debt is, it's the largest, the most important fiscal problem this country is facing. And yet nobody talks about it, least of all, Freeland.
Yeah.
So this is not fiscally responsible at all, not even close.
Not even close. And even if we boil it down to one little detail, and that is all of the GST that is collected next year by all Canadians, or residents or visitors, all of that goes to pay the $54 billion interest charges on our debt. So all of the GST revenues won't go to services and roads and hospitals and everything else. It only goes, like, $54 billion in interest. We collect roughly $54 billion in GST. It's amazing to me that she calls this fiscally responsible.
And remember, this is the same person who borrowed massive amount just 3-4 years ago because it was the right time to do it because interest rates were low. Again, in her mindset, interest rates were low and we're going to stay low forever. Well, guess what? They've gone up and they are not going to come down nearly as fast as she thinks they will.
Yeah.
So
they've gone up by 10x. Like, when she said that, the overnight lending rate published by the Bank of Canada was 0.5%, and they are now at 5%. So if I'm doing my math correctly, that's a 10x increase in the cost of debt.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
as the debt rolls over and has to renew at higher interest rate, the interest coverage that you were talking about is going to get worse, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse.
Yeah.
And she's piling it on.
So we're about 2/3 the way through the video. Let's see what else she has to say.
Potential investments, increasing the inclusion rate on capital gains. I think that it is high time for the opposition, which poses as being on the side of working people, to clarify its position today. Will the opposition join us in asking those at the very top to pay a little bit more to support Canadians? Or are they going to show their true colors and stand with the 0.1%? That's what Canadians want to know today, Mr. Speaker.
All right. So there's a couple of things here. First of all, notice the language, right?
Mhm.
Purposely misleading language that we're going to ask people to pay a little bit more. Of course, that's not true, not remotely true. What they mean is that they're going to be asked at gunpoint, because that's literally what the ultimate solution is to this. You don't pay your taxes, they will come after you with guns, right? And they are anti-guns, but they'll make an exception on this one. So they're not going to ask people, they're going to order people to pay more. So I can't stand this type of, like, they should have the decency to come out and say, we're going to order people to pay more. But of course, they try to come across as being soft and nice, and doesn't work. So that's one thing. Number two, it's laughable, and I'm not here to defend the Conservative, but it's laughable to think that a party would purposely align themselves with such a tiny percentage of the population. I mean, to curry favors from them, I mean, it's not going to get them elected. I mean, if you want to get elected at the federal level in this country, you need, well, I mean, Trudeau's pulled it off in the low 30s, but you really ought to try to be in the low 40s. So I mean, the whole idea, of course, the positioning of trying to make them look like villains that only want to go after people who smoke cigars and sitting on bags of money, and I mean, it's It's
well, let me
testimony
like,
to the type of the level of discussion we have in this country.
but I'd like to point out that she is among the 0.1%, and most of the people in her cabinet are part of that category as well, and they all congregate in the same, 100-kilometer radius in the Laurentians. And I'm stereotyping there to some degree, but I I I think it's also true that the richest people in our country know very well how to avoid such taxes. They have, uh, tax havens, and they move their businesses to another jurisdiction. They like, it's not going to be the so-called ultra wealthy, whatever that means, that pays more tax. So she's just outright lying to Canadians about this. For example, this capital gains issue, as far as I've understood, um, this will affect every Canadian that sells property in any year, worth more than $250,000 that is not their primary residence. So, that immigrant couple that came here 35 years ago and started a restaurant, and they've been serving, um, you know, chow mein or pizza or souvlaki, and they've been working their asses off, from 6 a.m. until midnight every day, and they've put their children through university, and they finally get to, 68 years old, and they're just kind of ready to try and retire, and they try to sell that business. And it's this capital gains tax that's now going to, um, cost them even more. And that business has been their retirement plan for 35 years. And it's people like that this hurts, this capital gains, nonsense.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I
No.
think that's who this hurts.
Well, it's certainly a segment, but I would also like to point out that she's playing games again with this 0.13%,
Yeah.
because what she doesn't understand is that all of these corporations, like the mom and pop that build something, they will sell their business only once.
Yeah.
But it's a bit like an escalator, right? Like there are people, people who get close to retirement and they want to exit. Well, they'll sell it, but there's a bunch of people coming behind them who are going to face the same decision. Some will be next year, some will be in 3 years, some will be right. So this is rolling, and the 0.13, I'm sure, is only what they think is going to happen this year, right? So again,
Yeah, I don't know where that number comes from. There's never been a good explanation about where that number comes from, and it's some magical number, 0.13. That's very precise.
Yes, yes. Now, we should also remind people that when I think it was in 2015 when they introduced a new higher tax bracket, right, for people who make approximately more than 250,000, right? The tax bracket now got moved to 33%. And of course, there was all kinds of projections that it was going to take in extra billions of dollars. Do you know what the outcome was? Zero.
I believe that.
Zero. It had no impact. And of course, some people.
What about this wealth tax on yachts and expensive cars? So any car or yacht worth more than $100,000, you had to pay extra tax on it. What's been the result of that?
That one I don't know, but
Yeah.
I know that, like, the reason why it was zero on the introduction of this new higher tax bracket was that it's very interesting, again, for people on the left, that they pick and choose about the power of incentives, right? Like when it comes to higher taxes, such as that one, people don't respond to in this case disincentive, right? They are going to work just as hard. They're going to, right? And it's not true. I mean, people had cautioned them and said, some people, and I'll tell you actually, I'm sure this woman is not an outlier. She's a psychiatrist in Nova Scotia, and she only works or bills up to the threshold so that she does not trigger a marginal tax rate, which in Nova Scotia I think is like 58%, right? Like you get to a certain point, every additional dollar you make, you only get to keep 42 cents. And she wants no part of that. Now, like
I suspect she has a plan to spend a good part of the year in Florida and enjoy the warm weather, and then she comes back here and earns, like, I don't know, but I suspect that she's made some calculation there about how much she needs to work in Canada, and then maybe she takes vacation or visits family, or like, how does she do that? How does she work to that cap and then stop?
Well, I don't know what her plans are, but my point would be that this has, once again, a knock-on effect that the Liberals seem to be completely blind to, which is we have a healthcare disaster going on right now. I mean, the number of Canadians don't have a primary physician is in the millions. The number of people who have to wait for 2-3 years for knee or hip replacement, right? The number of services where it's not really, we cannot afford, right, to antagonize physicians and to provide them with a disincentive to work extra hours. I mean, the way it was presented to me, it's not like she wasn't willing to work more. She just was unwilling to work more where she only got 42 cents for every dollar she earned. Well, so now you're providing a disincentive in terms of hours worked, which again, given that people, like right now, the supply of medical services is way below where it ought to be. I mean, the demand, we have an aging population, the demand's is surging, and it will continue to get worse. And right, so this
Yeah.
is the type, like they introduce these things and they never think of the unintended consequences. They never think about, thinking it through in terms of what is that going to do. And this is just an example among many. I mean, another one, which of course, from her perspective, because I think she accused somebody the other day of being economically illiterate. My goodness, she should take a look in the mirror, because I don't know if people who listen are aware that GDP per capita in this country has now fallen for, I believe, 7 consecutive quarters. The only reason this country is not technically in a deficit, which is usually described as 2 consecutive negative GDP, nominal GDP, but adjusted for inflation, right? The only reason is because we have so many more people than we used to, that our nominal GDP is growing, but it's growing slower than the rate of the population, which means that on a per capita basis, it is going down. 7 consecutive, and excuse me, from my perspective, it is a far better way of measuring economic well-being, like the GDP per capita, as opposed to just nominal, because you can play games. And I think the Liberals, again, have been playing games by, goosing up the numbers, by getting a lot of people in while productivity is going down. Well, why is productivity going down? Again, this is the part that people don't understand, the value of savings to allow a pool of capital that can be used, to buy equipment to make people more productive. I mean, that's the way it works. I don't know if you heard, Freeland is now hinting at putting pressure on pension plans in this country to compel them to invest more locally, because, right,
Yeah.
we don't have enough capital. Well, you've just going to destroy more capital, because you claim, of course, that you are a better user of that money than the people who own these businesses or corporation, which of course, on the face of it, given the massive amount of mismanagement, like they have no leg to stand on to tell us that they are better users of that money than it's appalling.
Right. So she wants to force Canadian institutions to invest their money within Canada.
Pension
And it's
plan.
crazy to me. Well, the CPP, and as if she's going to stop there, right? Next, it'll be the teachers' federations, and it'll be who knows.
Yeah.
But I know personally 2 people who are affected and making very different decisions this week than they would have a month ago about the future of their business. So here's one example where a man that I know here in Ontario employs 85 people in a factory, and he wants to now move his factory to Tennessee. So he's going to go through the challenge of moving his entire operation, his corporation, his family into another country and become citizens of that country in order to avoid paying taxes that he feels are deeply unfair and support a government that spends like drunk sailors,
Yep.
as he would put it. So another example is a venture capital or a new startup, a tech startup that's financed heavily with venture capital, and he's the CEO is a man that I know well enough, and he's actively concerned that venture capitalists are not going to put their money into this country if they have a choice to invest elsewhere. So if you're investing in let's say a crypto exchange that is on Canadian soil, but you could invest in a crypto exchange that is south of the border, they're going to go south of the border every time, because there's a clause in this language of the budget that talks about an exemption. So there's some exemption to this capital gains tax for investors who are more than 10% owners in a company, and that company has been their primary employment for more than 5 years. So who is that? That's the founder and no one else, probably. Everyone else, all the other investors now are penalized by this capital gains tax. And so investment will flee from this country. I can't see why she doesn't see it that way, and how she thinks that this is going to work.
Yeah, well, again, we have 8 years of, I hesitate to use the term mismanagement in the sense that, because I think central planning has such an appalling track record that it's bound for failure. I mean, in fact, I predicted it from the get-go. I mean, with this type of principles that guide them, it's going to be failure. And of course, it's happened exactly. But I mean, it's an easy call to make, because history is replete of people who come along and think that they know best, right? When in fact, again, Mises and Hayek have demonstrated why it cannot work, right? It's not even just the fact that the empirical evidence indicates that it doesn't work, but it's important to understand why it cannot work. So you combine the two of them, it's bad. It's really bad.
Jacques, I've enjoyed this. I'd like to do this again soon. How are you feeling? Wrap it up here, or do you have another topic?
No, I think it's good for now. We should leave some for doing it again soon, because I've enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. So let's stop here then. For those of you that did tune in, thanks very much. I appreciate that some of you were participating in the comments at Facebook. It's also possible to participate in comments at YouTube, and then Jacques can react immediately to those, or we can see those and bring them up on screen. We're working on getting comments integrated with X. We're just not there yet, and with Rumble, and we're not there yet either, but that's hopefully in the near future. Have a great night. Thanks very much. Jacques, good to see you again. Always enjoy the
likewise.
conversation with you.
Thank you very much, David.